Hello to our audience. Thank you for joining our event today. Our event today is a really good one. It's part 2 of a 4-webinar series that we're doing around taking control of your data center destiny to enable freedom, improved operations, and efficiency. Today's topic is simplifying data center operations to reduce complexity and restore peace to family time. Our webinar is brought to you by Nutanix, and we are thrilled to have Brian Soar from Nutanix today, who is a senior technical engineer with the company. Brian, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
Before we get started, I have a few things I want to make sure you're aware of. The most important thing is if you have questions during today's event, we want to hear from you. So please make sure that you use the questions area to ask any technical questions about what you're hearing, because we will be taking questions live throughout the event. So if you have questions, we really do want to hear from you. And as for prizes, this is part 2 of a 4-part series. In the final part, we'll be giving away a Microsoft Surface Studio computer. If you are here today, you are registered to win that prize. And for any new people that are in the series today, we'll also be sending you a Tango gift card. We'll be sending some information about that after the event today for anyone who's new that wasn't at our previous parts. And with that out of the way, I want to turn it over to Brian to tell us about how we simplify data center operations. Brian, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone. We're going to focus on the data center operations. We'll talk a little bit about what they've been historically and what they are today, and then kind of Nutanix's view on them and what we've been doing and what we continue to focus on around simplifying those so that we can free up time, make your life a bit better. Quickly, just have a couple of short marketing slides at the beginning. Really, we're focused on the hyper-converged infrastructure piece. Nutanix is kind of built out and become a platform company. We're going to focus around the infrastructure piece, and everybody talks about it being hyper-converged today, right? So maybe talking about how you manage and consume and upgrade and operate that, the processes that are along with that, and how it affects the people involved in that, which is probably most of the people attending here, right? That's where the interest comes from. To kind of set the stage a bit, we offer quite a bit of freedom in how you deploy our platform, right? We support 4 different hypervisors. We have our own Acropolis, HV hypervisor. We support VMware, which is the #1 hypervisor out there, and then also Microsoft and Citrix offerings. We give you a good bit of flexibility in the platform, so the physical server infrastructure that you'd like to deploy it on. All the big ones are there. We have our own branded appliances. We support Dell, EMC, Lenovo, all the big names there. There are also a few obscure ones there that we have for like ruggedized and government deployments and things like that that are not on the list. And then we give you a good bit of flexibility in how you deploy things to the cloud and manage that also, which we won't be focusing on that. We're really focusing on the infrastructure side of things today. We have a single, call it management point. It's called Prism. It's a web-based, modern HTML5-based, user experience, right? So you can pull that up in pretty much any browser, mobile device, whatever experience you'd like to pull that on. And, from there, you would do, all the initial setup. You would manage VMs. You'd manage the storage. You do all, like, your operations, analytics. Pretty much everything that we're talking about today, you do from Prism, and it makes it nice and easy for you. It's also pleasant to look at, as you can see from the example there.
We're going to ask our first poll question for the day, and it should be coming up on your screen now. And the question is, what is your least favorite part of infrastructure upgrades? I'll let you read the options for yourself. I won't read them off to you, but while we're on this poll slide, I want to ask Brian a couple of things from the audience. Number one is, if we think about, reusing infrastructure, when people think about upgrading to something like a hyperconverged solution or whatever, when they look at Nutanix, can they reuse their servers that they already have with the Nutanix software?
Yeah, I would say there's options to do that, right? So, we support HP and Cisco UCS and, Dell and, Lenovo, all those, right? So we publish, an HCL, so an approved list of, server models and the pieces in them, right? So if you own a the right model and generation of the server, then the next thing you would look at the list, and as long as it's got the right network card, disk controller, those kind of things in there, or that you could swap a piece out, then yes, you're free to use those.
And if they wanted to try it out on one of their systems, is there a way that they can try Nutanix ahead of time?
Yeah, good point. So we have something we called Community Edition. It's called CE for short. That is bundled, it's our platform, but it's only bundled with our hypervisor option, so HV below it. But if you want to, try out the storage piece and the Prism experience and all that, you get, it's a full offering, right? It's just the community side of it. And you can run that, I won't say on any hardware, but it has much wider support, and people even virtualize it inside of a VM on top of VMware. So it gives you a good bit of flexibility.
And we'll take a look at what we have as far as poll responses now. We have quite a few people that have responded. A lot of people hate a lot of things. A good chunk of the audience says they really don't like the time it takes to plan, perform, or basically the manual methods for a lot of upgrades. So there's a lot of opportunity for data center simplification, I would think, based on those responses.
Yeah, and I'm in kind of the all the above bucket also myself from those days, so I can.
As am I. It's just there's also a lot of risk sometimes in it if you don't do it right. So, that's the unfortunate piece. And I'll give it back to you, Brian.
Perfect. All right, so kind of looking at call it the past and then current day, but call them non-Nutanix infrastructure upgrades, right? So a lot of those upgrades are kind of like reading really bad diagrams or stereo instructions. It gets a bit confusing. They're not very fun. Requires a good bit of time. So it's kind of the idea behind my graphic there. And then really, depending upon whether you got kind of the call it the 3-tier approach where you buy server, storage, networking, all that separate, or even some of the other call them competing hyper-converged offerings, there's different layers of those stacks, right? You've got firmware, and you might have controller cards for fiber channel or the network, and you got switches and separate storage, right? And all those pieces have software and firmware that you have to upgrade, right? So you have to research the compatibility between them. If I want to upgrade just the firmware on my HBA, maybe there's a bug fix or some security thing that I want to do that, I need to make sure that it works with the the server firmware, that it works with the hypervisor version I'm running, that my fiber channel switch likes it, and my storage supports it. And then if I want to do the whole stack at once, I've got to check all those dependencies myself. So it's quite a bit. And then generally there's an approved order you should do some of those things in. And then I've got to go off and collect all those bits myself, and then I've got to execute all those upgrades. And, some of those vendors have tools for it. Some of them you're just command lining into something and uploading some bits and, waiting for it to happen, right? So it's a pretty wide difference in experience, and takes a good bit of time, right? So if we contrast and compare that on, how Nutanix does different things, right? So if we look at a node, we build clusters of nodes, and those nodes all kind of have these pieces, right? They're servers with some drives in them, whether they're spinning disk or flash or whatever combination that you choose to deploy. There's going to be BIOS in there, there's BMC, there's storage controllers, there's disks. You're going to run a hypervisor, one of the 4 that we support. AOS is called our platform layer, right? That's what provides all the distributed storage. That covers the Prism piece, all that management and control plane stuff. NCC is some like health checking that we do, and Foundation is the piece that we use to auto-deploy new nodes that we image them with to get them ready to become part of the cluster. So you have all those pieces, right? You don't want to go upgrade all those pieces separately and manually, so we have the notion of one-click upgrades. And basically you can click and upgrade these things independently if you want to choose. So if you want to just do the BIOS in a node, you could do that. If I want to do just the hypervisor, just AOS, right? You get flexibility to do pieces, or you can, do the whole stack if you want to. So we make that automated, where, if your cluster is internet connected, it will just reach out to the portal, pull down the bits for you, and much like your phone, then it says, hey, you've got, whatever the next version is available, and you click upgrade, and it's going to do a bunch of pre-upgrade checks. It's going to check the health of the cluster. It's going to be looking at compatibility. If I'm upgrading the AOS version, it's going to look at the hypervisor version I'm running and make sure it's compatible and let me upgrade that. And same way with firmware, it's going to be looking at the firmware you have and the firmware you want to go to tell you if it's possible and things like that. So we want to take all that complexity out in checking to make sure that things are compatible and also prevent you from stepping on your own foot. And then again, click that button, and it's going to go off and do these upgrades in a non-disruptive fashion. So some of the upgrades can be done without having to move any VMs around. So in the instance of like an AOS upgrade, I can do that since it's just our controller VM, so it doesn't move VMs around. It just goes one node at a time and rolls through the cluster and does it non-disruptive. Something like a firmware upgrade, right? It's got to take the node down. It's got to upgrade the firmware and bring it up. So we'll actually non-disruptively migrate the VMs off to another node. There's no disruptive, to the user or the application. Then we put that node into maintenance mode, down it. We upgrade the firmware. We boot it back up, health check it, and make sure everything is good before it's ready to join back in the cluster. The VMs move back, and it moves to the next node, and so on and so forth. So we make the process super simple for you. And then you not only do that for firmware, but we also do it for the software stacks, right? And we do this for all the different things. As we kind of continue to build out our story, right? We have, if you look down the list, that's a good list of things that we do. The AOS layer, again, that's the control and data plane layers, right? So it's got the Prism and all the storage features in there. We offer file services. We do that, one click. We can one click upgrade the hypervisor, all four of them as part of that. The firmware, the cluster check, foundation is the deployment thing, and then we have a like an automation tool for managing applications. That's part of Prism, so we one-click upgrade that, right? So just make it super simple. That's what the screen shows. That's during an upgrade process. Before that, it would show you a list of versions that you could potentially upgrade to, and there'd be a download button, which would then turn into an install button once the bits were downloaded. If you're not internet connected, then you can just download the bits yourself and upload them to the cluster, and then it's the same process from there on. So kind of what we're focused on is kind of a cluster-based upgrade, right, where you would go to each cluster and do those upgrades. But we've got a lot of customers that own multiple clusters, whether they're in one site or they're distributed, all across the world. So the notion of multi-cluster upgrades is a vision that we're building out currently. So we offer it for the AOS level, and then eventually have the vision to be able to do multi-cluster upgrades for the hypervisor and firmware and things like that. That is part of our vision that we're building out. So today, you can actually select multiple clusters that are in whatever location you want, and then choose the upgrade version. So, these are on like a 5.x version, so I could go to, the next version of 5 as an example. And when I select them and choose upgrade, I have two options. I can do them all in parallel, where in this case it would do all 3 clusters at the same time, or I could do them in serial. So it'll do the first cluster, and then once that one's complete, it'll go to the next cluster and so on and follow through the order to make that happen. So if you are somebody with a larger environment, then it makes doing the upgrades a bit easier, because you can knock them out at the same time if you want, or at least get the process started and go away and enjoy your evening, weekend, or whatever it is. And the kind of the reason why people, it's kind of a vision for us to get here. The reason why they trust us to do that is because we built and earned their trust with the one-click process that, over time, and they know that it's reliable, it's easy. So, hey, I would like to do a bunch of these in a chunk and just have them done for me.
And we have our next poll question that we'll launch now. And we're asking you, what would you do if you had more free time? This is not a technical question, but it's, I think, a really interesting one, because it helps sort of see what, people really want to do with their lives when they're not having to work all the time. And Brian, while we have people answering this, and I hope that lots of people answer this because it's a really interesting question, what's happening behind the scenes during one-click upgrades? I mean, obviously workloads will have to operate even while a node's being worked on. Is our workloads automatically shifting to other nodes? How is that actually happening mechanically behind the scenes?
Yeah, so we've got, there's we call it a lifecycle management service, but that's really like the automation brains behind what's going on. It understands all the different type of upgrades. It understands the server vendor and how they like to do firmware upgrades, and can account for all that and the dependencies, and then it orchestrates that whole process. So the case of like a hypervisor upgrade, right? So typically, if you upgrade a hypervisor, you're going to have to evacuate the VMs off that node at some point, because it's going to have to reboot the node so that you can get the new hypervisor version running. So it'll account for that. It'll put that node in a maintenance mode from both a storage standpoint and a hypervisor standpoint, and then move the VMs off, move them back on once it's done. So yeah, it handles all that for you. So you really can just click that start button and either walk away or watch the little lines move, for the progress bars.
Perfect. We've got a lot of people to respond to this question. And so most of you want to spend more time with your family. Well, half of you want to spend more time with your family. The other half either doesn't have a family, or I won't say anything else. We'll learn new skills and things like that. So there's a lot of things people would like to do with their time if they had more of it. So interesting. That's a really interesting question. Brian, take it away.
Great. Excuse me. So, to make all this, kind of simplicity and one-click stuff work in the background, there has to be, a lot of intelligence bits built. So we talked a bit about around the upgrades. We have Lifecycle Manager in the back, but for a lot of our other, operational things, we use a technology, that we call XFit. Some people call it CrossFit for that. But what it is, it's really our machine learning-based piece that uses a lot of, intelligence to decipher what's going on in a cluster, learn behaviors, and then take actions, make recommendations based upon those. And it's doing that for both at a cluster level, and then if you have a larger environment, then it does it for a larger distributed environment. We have a version of Prism we call Prism Central, which is kind of the manager of managers. So if you want to see a view for your entire environment, if that's, 2 clusters or hundreds of clusters, then you can see, that from that central location and be able to take those actions. So it works great for, cleaning up and finding dead, VMs, and finding, balance out the bully VMs, right? So VMware's got, and even, Hyper-V and XenServer, they all kind of have their DRS type functionality. And then, for our hypervisor, we have, we call it ADS, right, Acropolis scheduler. And it does a similar thing, right? It's going to balance out, those VMs for that. And we do that for both storage-related reasons, and then the hypervisors will do it for, compute and memory-related reasons. And then, again, some of this intelligence comes in when you add, be able to add nodes that we'll talk about here later, and bring them into the cluster, extend it, and make that process seamless for you. So focusing on, the inefficiencies, right? I mean, we all get some crazy requirements from application owners. They, ask for the moon and stars, and generally end up caving and giving them for that. But in their environment, that generally, results in a bunch of waste. So we identify, kind of those different things, and we bucketize them into really 4 categories, right? There's constrained VMs, which are really, kind of running hot. They don't maybe have enough resources, right? So they could be constrained from a CPU and memory standpoint, and we're going to observe that and then make a recommendation for you. And then there's something that's oversized, right? It's just the opposite, right? Maybe somebody needed 8 vCPUs on their VM, but they really needed 4. And so you're going to see that it's only using a fraction of that. Maybe they're actually only using 2. So if we downsize them to 4, they're in a much better place. And then now I've got those resources to use for other things in the cluster. And then there's inactive VMs, right? So these are VMs that maybe they're just powered off for a long time, or maybe they're running but nobody's using them, right? So we're going to, through the CrossFit algorithm, we are going to find those VMs and then make a recommendation to let you know, hey, these are potential targets that you can clean up. And then that's all in an effort to gain back resources, right, that you can use for different applications. And then the last up is bully VMs, right? So if a VM on a node is monopolizing the resources of that node, then it's going to get identified as a bully. and then we can inform you and then make recommendations based upon that to remediate that so that it doesn't affect those other VMs anymore.
Our next poll question is for the audience here. And how do you manage capacity today? Do you have a separate tool? Do you do it manually? You just take a guess, or you really don't? And this is an important question because I think it really falls on what Brian was just talking about. And Brian, when we think about this in the Nutanix world, I mean, I assume that somewhere in Prism, you're basically providing the user with, hey, here's a bunch of recommendations on what they're seeing, on what we're seeing in the environment that you should consider taking action on. Is that true?
Yep. So the kind of the inactive, constrained, bully, right? There's multiple places we actually show you that in Prism, right? There's an efficiency area, but on the main screen there's basically a widget that's kind of split into 4 pieces, like my simple diagram was there, that shows you the different categories with just a VM count, and then if you click on that, then expands into a list and gives you the details about the VMs. And it's actually possible for one VM to be both oversized and constrained. It could be oversized on CPU, but not have enough memory, right? So it's going to, sense all those things and inform you. And then today, we give you the recommendation, and then it's up to the admin to go and take action on that. Something, for the future that we key is some people would like the ability to potentially just have it automatically remediate for you. So that's something, that we are looking to build in the future to that if you wanted to do kind of, Terminator type stuff, that if it auto senses it has too much memory, then it could, trigger it and then go take action automatically for you.
Now, on the slide, you also showed basically runway increase. From a capacity management perspective, are you telling the user how much runway they have left as far as resources go at their current consumption rate?
Yep, that's actually our next slide that we'll cover right after the poll, so we'll dive into that. Yep.
Okay. And with that said, let's take a look at what we have for responses. And it's a lot of you are doing this manually, or you're guessing. So I would say only about a third of you are actually doing this in a automated way. And we don't even know if that's the case because we don't know what the tool is. So there's a lot of room for improvement here on simplification. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me. And even a lot of if you do own a tool, a lot of those tools, because they're maybe a third party or they have to deal with a lot of, kind of generality in it. So they tend to make some, fairly generic recommendations for that. Since we're, built a platform, we kind of own everything here, right? We're able to provide, much more detailed insights in that. So we'll kind of step through this, right? Here we're looking at what we call, basically a runway chart. And we track runway for at the cluster level, and then you can dive in and look at a per node level, at the host level if you wish. But it really makes most sense at the cluster. You see that at a CPU. You see that at memory, and then at obviously storage capacity, right, which is kind of the big bucket items that you care about to manage. And then we represent that in what we call runway, which is really the number of days before you would run out of those capacities in that cluster. And then they're all kind of rolled up into a blended number, right? So if I only have, 5 days of CPU, then the cluster really only has 5 days. So it's really going to be whatever the most limiting factor is going to be the limiting factor for that. And if you click on any of those, then it'll give you a list. Like if you click on the CPU one, you're going to see like a list of the VMs that are using the most CPU. Similar thing for the memory. And if you click at the storage, then we're going to show you how the storage is broken down in a cluster. How much is used by VMs? How much is used for like snapshots replication? How much is the system using? Did you reserve any space to, so that it wasn't viewable by anybody? Those are the kind of, details that you would see in there. And then, it's great to understand that, but then, what would it look like if I needed to change the workload on a cluster? That's really kind of where it gets interested. That, somebody comes to you and they have I need to add 5 more databases, I need to add 200 more VDI users, I need to, add X, right? So they're going to give you some requirements, and then you'd want to, kind of figure out how that would do. So the capacity planning piece, we call them the, building, like what-if scenarios, essentially, where you can model what it would look like to add more requirements or resources to the cluster, or even remove workloads from the cluster, right? And we allow you to do this in a number of different ways. And then based upon that, you're also allowed to declare the runway, right? So maybe you have not much runway today, or maybe you have a lot, right? So when I build my scenario, I can say, I'd like to add this workload, but I'd still like to maintain 6 months of runway. So that way, if the workload drops me below 6 months of runway, then it will take that into the calculation, and it'll tell me, which nodes to add. It'll tell me, when I should add them. And this is all, done very similar, right? So it's, in that highlighted bubble there, it's showing that I've added a, VDI workload. In a couple more clicks here, we'll get to see what that experience is like. I click the recommendation button. That's going to then tell me, not only is it going to tell me how many nodes to deploy, but it's going to tell me exactly the configuration that it recommends for those. So it's going to tell me which CPUs, how much memory, how much storage capacity, how many of them I need, and then when I need them, right? So the example shows that it's adding those nodes on 2 different dates. So I can actually add workloads in multiple times. So maybe I want to add 100 VDI users right away, and then like in another month I want to add another 100 more, whatever. So it'll take all that into the recommendations, and then when it spits that out, it'll tell you when to add them and what types. And how you put it in is pretty simple, right? It's just a nice little form you fill out in there. You choose the type of workload. You can, there's SQL workloads, there's VDI ones, Splunk. You can just do generic VMs, right? So you can give it a generic VM, or if you have the workload running on your cluster already, then you can just go back and pick, select your actual VMs that are running and say, give me 5 more of these, 10 more of these, whatever the example is. Or you could just, increase by some percentage, right? Say, I want to add 30%, or I want to take 30% away from the thing, so you can do a percentage add or remove as part of that, and it does all the calculations. And then it also understands the brand of server you're running below it. So as I look at a cluster that is, say, running on HP, it's going to make recommendations with the appropriate HP node or UCS or whatever the underlying cluster that it's all infrastructure that's already running on. It takes that into account also. So, and then something else we do with the machine learning is the XFit watches all the different VMs, and then it learns their behavior, right? So if you see the chart there, the dark blue line is the actual consumption of whatever value that is, if it's a CPU of that VM. And then that blue shaded area that kind of wraps it is what we call the baseline, and that's really the learned behavior. And then should that metric exit the baseline, whether it's above it or below it, it'll create what's called an anomaly. And then that anomaly is really what you care about, because it's actually deviating from its real behavior. If I just kind of got traditional performance charts, and if it kind of spikes, multiple times a day like this, or maybe it does once a day, I don't really know if that's normal or not. So this is going to let you, hey, it's normal, and I only care if it exceeds or goes below that line, and then we're going to, give you an alert that's going to show up in Prism. It could, send you an email, or if you have another monitoring tool that, does like traps and catches those, and you could be alerted that way, right? So you can feed that into kind of your whatever systems that you already have deployed for alerting. But it just allows you to kind of cut out the noise and then really care about the things that are actually not normal. And for that, and then we monitor those for a number of stats, right? We look at, for VMs, we look at CPU memory, network, storage metrics, and then we do this both at the VM level, at the host level, and at the cluster level to give you those types of metrics. And then, certainly Prism is nice to look at, and it's easy to click around and find all the stuff. But, if things are, great every day in your world and you just want to pull data or get informed, you shouldn't have to go there and look. So you can actually do customized reporting, right? So we've got a nice visual report wizard where you can pick all these charts and data points and build tables, and then have these reports, automatically sent to you if you wish, or they could just run and you can pick them up what you like. And then these reports can be emailed. They can be set on a schedule. So if you want to run them, daily, weekly, monthly, you can declare, the period of time you want it run in, and then have it sent to you. And they're available in both PDF and CSV format for you.
We have our final poll question of the event, which when you typically have to add capacity to your environment, I mean, how long does it take? And Brian, for here, are we talking about, do you think, just to provision new capacity or to actually buy new hardware and everything else?
Yeah, really the provisioning piece, right? So once it's, even once it's racked, let's be fair and say, like, once it's even racked in there, like, how long is it going to take you to install a hypervisor, provision storage? You basically get it to the point where you could drop some apps and VMs on there, yeah.
So, we're getting closer to the end of the event. When we talk about some of the ways that you're working to simplify people's lives, a lot of it's through really analytics and reporting, but obviously there's other pieces too, like automated upgrades and things like that, like a single click. What's some of the feedback that you've gotten from your customers? I mean, I'm sure that you've talked to some customers that have said, hey, this has made my life easier. I mean, what are some of those like big stories that you've heard? I mean, do you have any examples?
Yeah, there's great. I mean, if you look on, there's even probably a bunch of examples. I think we have a lot of slide decks. I didn't include any of them, but in our slide decks, you'll see like snippets from social media where people talk about them. There's examples where they're like upgrading their clusters while they're on a helicopter ride in Las Vegas, and they're based out of Australia, right? So their gear is all the way across the world, but they're on a plane or a helicopter, and they're doing their one-click upgrades. A lot of people are doing their upgrades during the week, during business hours. There's a pretty healthy chunk of examples, and then I think based upon that, right, that experience, then they push us for more, right? So that's where things like, initially we did just the software, then they wanted us to do the firmware. We want to do multi-cluster upgrades, right? So they get that taste, and they're like, well, what about this, right? So it's kind of the continued push to get better and expand the features.
Got it. Let's see what we have for responses here. A lot of people are in that 1 to 4 hour or 0 to 4 hour range, but we see a lot of people in there a lot longer, and a disheartening number that are in days. So it's I think this, again, as we've seen throughout this event, there's a lot of room for improvements when it comes to overall simplicity of data center operations. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely, and even I bet some of the people that are in those shorter time frames, they may have like built a lot of processes and automation themselves, like scripts to kind of speed this up, right? So there was maybe some significant effort that they spent to do that to kind of shorten that period for them, right? So or maybe they just have a simple environment, right? There could be a lot of reasons for that. So it's a pretty healthy spread between all those.
Perfect. And there you go.
Yep. And then kind of last thing that we'll look at here is just, exactly what does that expansion look like, right? So whether you're expanding because you just, decided you need more, you're refreshing the nodes, the system, as part of the planning piece, told you to do those and you bought those, right? So the nodes, typically arrive pre-imaged. But it may or may not be the same hypervisor, right, that you are running within your cluster, right, since we support hypervisor. Some of the OEM vendors ship them with the hypervisor that you choose. Some of them just ship them as a default. They always send with the same hypervisor, right? So we need to account for that in our expansion and our imaging process. So that's what that foundation piece does. And then once you stack those nodes and you've cabled them and you've hit the power button, they'll actually pop up and the cluster will find them on the network, right? So they use like IPv6 discovery and they'll find those. So the example here is we just went into the settings menu on Prism and there's an option for expand cluster. So if I click on that, it's going to kind of the top half of that where there's those 4 little boxes, right? What it's showing me there is it found a node and it gives me, an ID for that node. And then I could see multiple nodes, right? So if I had connected a bunch of them, then I could, maybe I'm going to put a few in one cluster and then I'll go to another cluster and pick a few. So I'm going to pick the nodes that I want and I can decipher that based upon their ID, which is really their serial number. So I check the box and then I provide a couple IP addresses for them, and then I, click that next button, and then that's where it's going to ask me, if it's going to tell me the hypervisor has on that, and then if that's not the hypervisor I want or not the version I want, then I have the option there to provide the, the ISO media to do the change. And then when I click the expand, it's going to, either just join that node to the cluster and then IP it for me, or it'll actually re-image it with the appropriate hypervisor and version, and then join it to the cluster. So as I advance this one more step, then I've clicked that. It's going to do any imaging that's needed, and then it joins it to the cluster, both from a storage and a hypervisor standpoint, and extends that storage pool so that I get all the new performance and capacity as part of that cluster, and it joins the hypervisor cluster, so then I can begin to run VMs on it and be ready to go. And same process regardless of the type of infrastructure that you run for the server vendor below us. And that gives you just kind of a simple look, and the simplicity that it brings, probably quite a bit different from the way that most people in the survey question were doing for that. And that is my last slide, Scott. So if we have some questions here, let's take them.
We answered a lot of the questions throughout the event, so I think that we're in pretty good shape. But one of the things that we want to make sure, where can people go to learn more about the whole Decide movement here? Yeah,
absolutely. So, obviously you can just go to Nutanix.com, but there is something we call Test Drive. You can find it off the website. You can find it on Google, but it's just Nutanix Test Drive. And what that'll actually do is, in a public cloud provider, it basically spins you up like a nested version of it. So if you want to just learn more about Prism and kind of what that experience is, you're really you're not running like a lot of VMs, right? So if you just want to see what it looks like to kind of see that management side of things, then you'll get a taste of that. That's a great place that you can do it. And then, certainly other webinars, you can, look through Community Edition like we spoke, and then, talk to your local account team, your partners. We have, hosted proof of concepts. They can do demos. There's just a lot of ways, a lot of good video content out there to learn more on.
And would also suggest that people visit Nutanix.com/decide to take a look at the all of the components of this webinar series that we're doing as well. And there's lots of places to get more information. Now, don't forget that this is part 2 of 4 in this series. Part 3 will be next week, and part 4 is the week after, same day, same time. That'll be 3 p.m. Eastern each day. And on part 4, we'll be giving away that Microsoft Surface Studio. And we look forward to seeing you for next week's event. And I'm going to tell you what the topic is here. I meant to have it on my screen. Part 3 is going to be talking about, we're actually entitled it Data Center Avengers Assemble. This will be creating the right data center support team. And Nutanix's CIO, Wendy Pfeiffer, will be joining us for that part of this series. We look very forward to that. Thank you to Brian for this great presentation today, and thank you very much to our audience for being here.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.